Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on 3 or 4 things you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express News, and I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith.
Hello.
And our special guest, District 5 Councilwoman Teri Castillo.
Hello.
Teri, welcome. It's been 10 months since you've been on. So much has transpired in that 10 months. New president, new mayor. The city manager and Spurs are actually talking out loud about the Spurs arena and Project Marvel. They were not doing that about a year ago. They were still keeping everything nice and under wraps. But maybe you wish you were still back there because it's become very loud and it's taking up a lot of your time as a council. But I mean, you've also got a kind of yawning budget deficit you got to deal with in the next few weeks. You've got a new mayor. You're kind of developing a relationship with her. But let's start with kind of the biggest news of last week, which was about Project Marvel and the Spurs arena. So I'd like to start by kind of, before we get to last week, let's go way back in time and just kind of walk me through how you are thinking about public financing for a Spurs arena, how that's evolved over the last 2 years, because really it's been about that kind of time frame. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. When Project Marvel was proposed to council and community as a scope, the funding mechanism was zero public dollars would go towards the construction of Project Marvel, right? And that's every piece, right? Whether it's the Henry P. Gonzalez Convention Center and or a proposed stadium or theater. Yeah. But what I've argued is if you're using a TERS, that is public dollars. It's a mechanism which essentially absorbs funds that otherwise would go to the city's general fund. Right. And we know that's the fund that services things like public safety, streets, sidewalks, drainage.
Just to be clear, so the city manager, in talking to city council about Project Marvel, which is just a quick rundown of what that entails. Mm-hmm. It's an expansion of the convention center, really significant upgrades to the Alamo Dome, kind of refashioning the John Woods Federal Courthouse into a music venue, several other components. So he talked about it as, hey, this is free money, basically, because it's coming from a tax increment refinance or a reinvestment zone.
Yeah, yes. Okay. And the different components of the finance structure that we now have, right, is the PFC, which would be state dollars that would have to go towards some type of sports district. But sports district investment can look like the infrastructure around the current Alamo Dome or around current facilities. So what we're having the conversations now about is also what a general obligation bond could look like to fund the infrastructure around the proposed sports district. And when we talk about the general obligation bond, right, those are typically the bonds where we have huge investments in our communities all throughout the city, which range from park investments, drainage investments, and so much more. So I think as the conversation has evolved, the public is asking like, hey, does this mean that my priorities within my district are going to have to potentiate to the next bond cycle? Or will the investment in my community look like less because we're going to potentially invest in the sports district with the general obligation bond?
So do you mean that your constituents are asking, it's like, okay, if we spend, let's just say, $400 million on infrastructure around a Spurs arena and kind of threaded throughout the Project Marvel area, which is kind of anchored in and around Hemisphere Park. So they're saying, if that money is going there, that's so much more bond financing that's not going to go to repair our streets, build parks, improve parks, things like that.
Yeah, and that's a concern that I've heard from my constituency, and not just limited to District 5. I hear from folks all throughout the city that are saying, hey, since 2012, the city's invested over $400 million in downtown around Hemisphere, which is roughly $33 million a year, while we're waiting for a curb or a street or a sidewalk. And it doesn't sit well with the constituency that they may be told, wait, but we're going to prioritize investment downtown.
Right. Now, has council talked with Eric Walsh about what a bond package would it just be, would it be just a bond election just for Hemisphere, or would it be part of a much larger package,
Yeah,
like $1 billion package.
Yeah, so
just to throw a number out.
Yeah, so during the budget, the Project Marvel briefing, what I requested that if the city does move forward with this project and there is a bond to support public improvements, that line item should be its own proposition. Because typically when you have parks or facilities, it's within one proposition bundled together. So if you have the sports district within that, it puts the general public in the position where, hey, do I want the investment in Normal Oil Park and downtown? So if you separate the two, it gives the public an opportunity to say yes to my parks improvements, but potentially yes or no to investment in Project Marvel infrastructure. So that's been one of my requests, and it's been a request of some council as well and the public to separate the two, to give the public an opportunity to have a say where their public dollars should be allocated.
What's your political sense? I mean, you're a politician. You may not like the you may not like the word.
I'm an organizer. But you are.
Who got elected. I mean, we can split hairs later. So presumably you have some political sense. Like if that bond election were to be held today, would voters support infrastructure spending for Project Marvel?
What I'm hearing from the public is they want to ensure, and they're concerned, right? We're seeing folks who have lost their lives because of failed flood infrastructure. We're seeing folks not have access to just the basic streets and sidewalks. And what I'm hearing from my constituency is let's prioritize investing in our neighborhoods. And yes, there's opportunity to do both, but not at the cost of communities having to wait longer for their infrastructure investment.
And what is the timeline now for this bond? I know there was a lot of thought that it would happen this November in conjunction with the county venue tax proposal to put money towards part of the arena. But what do you see as a feasible timeline of when the public may be asked to weigh in on bond money for infrastructure for this sports and entertainment district?
Yeah, so as council has been briefed, it's essentially like a potential funding mechanism. Council has not gotten into the weeds of what that looks like and what the timeline can look like. But I know there's consensus from council in terms of a housing bond and doing that sooner than 2027, just given a lot of the federal cuts that we're seeing. And then, of course, we're about to run through the 2022 housing bond resources.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost beside the point, though, isn't it? I mean, because you've got a deadline coming up for a bond election. I mean, you can't call an election after August 18th? Yeah. And that's next week, if memory serves. So is it even feasible to be talking about putting a bond election on the November ballot?
Yeah, I don't see council having enough information, full information to make a decision like that by August 18th to move something forward to the voters. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of what Project Marvel entails, the finance structure for the sports stadium in particular. Right, the Spurs have committed so far in $500 million of investment of development around the sports district, but council hasn't gotten into the details of what does that development look like. If it's housing, is there going to be affordable housing? Is it going to be market rate? And I think these are a lot of pieces that council needs to tease out and have an understanding of before we commit to moving something to the voters.
Now, you've got Bexar County is already moving forward with a venue tax election that would, if successful, pay for, projects at the east side footprint that the county owns that includes Freeman Coliseum, the Frost Bank Center, but it would also free up generate about as much as $311 million for a Spurs arena. So in a way, this is the first and maybe only public vote on a Spurs arena this year. Does it bother you that that's on the ballot, even though you have a lot of remaining questions?
I think, right, in terms of the pieces that council and that I have purview over, there's a lot of unknowns, right, as I described, in what that additional $500 million can look like. There's still questions around the CBA and just things that still need to be teased out on the council side. I was surprised to see that the county didn't secure a community benefits agreement as the city council had. So I think, right, in terms of them taking it to a public vote, I think that's what we'll see, right? Whether the public is supportive of funding a new stadium or not.
Without a benefits agreement, community benefits agreement. Now, or really like a firm East Side plan, which I think was County Judge Peter Sakai's one of his threshold things. Like you have to have a plan to deliver some of the growth that the Frost Bank Center never delivered.
Mm-hmm.
It was, that was largely publicly financed, and there was some implicit promises about growth that just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last week you had this kind of climactic meeting where you got a report on the economic. It was a report on the economic impact of the Project Marvel. Mm-hmm. And the Spurs arena, that was done by a different consultant, the Spurs. Mm-hmm. And you got a report on community input for Project Marvel. Let's start with those two reports. Were they adequate? What did you glean from them, and what were their weak spots, do you think?
Yeah, so hearing from community on the community engagement process and what that looked like, following the conversation with council, what they shared with me is they weren't under the impression that public input meeting session was to gather what a community benefits agreement could look like. Mm-hmm. And had they had that information, they thought the structure should have been different. And they believe that should have been stated at the start of the meeting, that the goal of this is to shape a potential community benefits agreement for council. Whereas what it was is pick out all the bells and whistles for this project.
What you like.
Yeah. So that there was no opportunity to say, well, what if we don't like this, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we heard in the District 5 town hall was a lot of dissent, right, around the project itself and saying we need to invest in affordable housing, infrastructure, transportation, and workforce training is what we saw. And then, of course, looking at the Able City report, those trends are evident throughout pretty much every 10 council districts of what the public feels that we should be prioritizing in terms of investment. And it's also consistent with the city budget survey as well. But moving on to the GSL study, right? This is they're a consultant firm that's notorious within the academic community for always just making these sports districts sound like the best investment any city or municipality can make. And what we found is there's no data set that the study points to in terms of where they're gathering their numbers. And this is something that was very refreshing to hear Mayor Jones hit on, and the public as well, saying like, what is your source for these numbers? Yeah. And they didn't provide them to us. And, one thing that I always think of is like in college, you have to have your sources. Right. Some professors, many, you'll get a whole letter grade decrease from your paper if you do not have your sources. And
so what CSL came up with was an economic benefit of, I think it was more than $18 billion over a 30-year period.
Yes.
So the bottom line for you is you might not buy that.
Yeah, just looking at the trend in which the studies that they produce for cities, and also when you look at, for example, the wages and salaries, it includes the salaries of the players, right? So I would argue that inflates the wages that it's going to bring to city.
It might
when you're counting, these $1 million contracts of the athletes.
Yeah, Wimby. He probably equals about 3,000 workers, probably more than that. Anyway.
I know the mayor was concerned too that that kind of firm, it's owned by a company in which a Spurs investor, 6th Street partner, has a majority stake, and so she kind of characterized this as a report that was not independent. And I was curious if you shared that view.
Yes, right. When we look at who owns the consulting firm, it's 6th Street Partners, which is also a co-owner of the San Antonio Spurs. And when city staff was asked to clarify, right, how is this not a conflict? It was the response was there's a wall. But quick Google search, they share staff, right? So how are you creating that wall when you have folks work for the same organizations working on the same project? So I do think there is an issue of transparency in terms of how do we know, right? They aren't collaborating when they work for both organizations.
So last week, Mayor Jones tried to slow things down to say we need to do a truly independent study. Go out again, try it over. Not with CSL, and we need to put off finalizing or completing a term sheet with the Spurs and City. this was, I think, I would consider it her first defeat at council. She had, she was definitely in the minority. You joined her, I believe. There were 4 of you. Mm-hmm. There were 7 on the other side, and Eric Walsh, he can do math, very simple math, and looked at it and said, okay, well, I'm going forward mm-hmm. with negotiations. How, in your assessment, like how has Mayor Jones handled herself in these arena talks? Like, are you satisfied with her leadership on this?
I think her take on, and her line of questioning is very refreshing, right? Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, right, she's asking, what are the sources that you're providing council mm-hmm. To understand how we can give the best and most well-informed decision? She's asking questions in terms of the term sheet, right? If we are going to enter in negotiations and there's a number on that sheet, does that mean we're committing to over $400 million? Mm-hmm. And I think those are questions that the council and the public deserve answers to. Mm-hmm. And while there may not have been consensus in terms of getting the independent study and or hitting pause, I think it's in alignment with the masses and what the public's requesting. Mm-hmm. So while, it may not have been the result that, I would have liked to have seen, I think it's a principled result that, the public was also calling for in terms of an independent study. Yeah. And council is essentially moving forward without having full information and full studies, which elected officials and folks making big decisions, we should be equipped with all the information. And her ask is give us information and we can make the best decision when well informed.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, why do you think there is such a rush amongst a majority of city council members to finalize this term sheet by, I think the deadline that the Spurs would like is August 21st? I mean, why do you think, you are in this minority group who says, let's pause it, whether that's for a couple weeks, a couple months?
Yeah, and I think the arguments that we heard at the last council meeting was, we don't want the Spurs to leave. And then, of course, right, the cost of construction, the longer we wait to solidify projects, right, costs are going to go up. And do we want to pay more later or pay what we negotiate now? Because the Spurs would, as proposed, be responsible for any cost overruns. And ultimately, I think, we just need to ensure we, being council, need to be well informed, have all the information before we give direction, because to your point, we are navigating a budget deficit. And the argument that we're hearing is, well, they're 2 separate projects. But there's omitted costs associated with the full construction and materialization of Project Marvel. And what that looks like is street maintenance, sidewalk improvements, public safety costs, right? We want to ensure in case of emergency, fires nearby can respond. We have enough squadrons. And then, of course, having enough officers in the area for traffic or whatever the case may be. Those have very expensive costs associated with them that will impact the general fund. So I think to discuss both as separate projects running parallel is irresponsible to the public, because we're telling them, hey, we may have to increase fines or reduce services, but at the same time, we're planning for a very expensive project that can and will impact the general fund. Now, what I was surprised to hear was one of my colleagues, it may have been the mayor, asked, have we done a general fund analysis? How is this project going to impact the general fund? And we were told no. And we're talking about a budget deficit, and we haven't done an analysis. Right. So it's just very alarming.
Now,
you're also one of the council members who, from the get-go, was calling for a community benefits agreement. The one that the Spurs have proposed, it's about is it $60 million over a 20-year period? I'm curious what you think of that figure, if that's a sufficient figure in your mind, or what you'd like to see out of a community benefits agreement in terms of just the money that the Spurs would be giving back to the San Antonio community in some form.
I think the residents of San Antonio have sustained this organization and are diehard fans. And I think when I think of the residents of San Antonio, they're the MVP of the San Antonio Spurs. And I think a CBA that's consistent with one of the top ranked players on the Spurs would like to be something that I see. Because when we see the contracts of many of these athletes, it's well-deserved, well-earned, but also the people of San Antonio, work just as hard, and they sustain this organization by going to events, buying merchandise, and so much more. So I would like to see an increase in the commitment for the community benefits agreement. Now, in terms of the structure, CBAs are driven by the community. And what we saw proposed to us was proposed by the organization, which isn't a community benefits agreement. Their concessions is essentially what was presented.
Yeah, I mean, it was heavy. They were talking about, I believe it was $30 million for early childhood and pre-K development using, one project would be taking closed, shuttered schools, public schools in San Antonio, and converting some of them into pre-K and early childhood education centers. So that's that may be okay. What I hear you saying is you need to have some kind of public forum where voters actually kind of weigh in on what they want to see. Is that what you're?
Yeah, typically with CBAs,
like a plebiscite.
Typically there's a governing structure in place, right? Like the redistricting committee or the bond committee, where each elected appoints individuals to then tease out what that CBA looks like. And then you go into the negotiation process with the organization or entity. And we haven't had that. And then with the proposal, I evaluate because early childhood education is very important. But in terms of investing in these shuttered schools, it's in the millions in terms to bring them up to standard. That's why those schools were one of the many reasons they were selected to close their doors. In addition to that, there's not enough children to go to that school. So now we're reopening schools where there aren't necessarily the student population to enroll. So it's like the cost associated with the vacant structure. And then, of course, where are we going to find kids when, part of the reason of the closure is there's not kids. Yeah.
And it could be that the Spurs proposed that because, I don't know, the mayor in her campaign seemed to want to expand pre-K for essays. So it's kind of in that general ballpark. To go back to Mayor Jones for a moment. So we know what she said last week in public at the meeting. Has she been talking with council members one-on-one about Project Marvel and about the Spurs Arena, or is everything you're seeing from her happening in public in real time as she's saying it?
No, we have conversations in our one-on-ones with the mayor to discuss ongoing issues as well as what's coming up. So there are conversations being had in terms of what a CBA looks like, what type of information council is receiving, and then we take it to the dais.
How often do you all have those one-on-ones with her?
Yeah, similar with Mayor Ron Nirenberg, right? They're monthly, and or when we have something to discuss, we pick up the phone and call each other.
Have you found her to be an accessible mayor, particularly in comparison to Mayor Nirenberg?
The few times I've reached out, she's been accessible. So similar with Mayor Ron Nirenberg, it's the same access in terms of if we need to have a conversation about a policy, we're accessible to discuss those issues.
I know you found yourself at odds with her. You're one of 3 council members who have been at odds with her of changes she has proposed to the policymaking process, something we typically refer to as council consideration requests. These are basically proposals that you all filed to create a new policy, a program, an initiative. And a couple weeks back, she, announced some changes that she had come up with and said, these don't require a vote. I can make these. You are one of 3 members who took the rare step of filing a 3-signature memo, which forces the mayor to call a meeting. You all are going to be meeting this week to talk about it. I wanted to ask you, how did it even get to this place in the first place where, you are having to force this meeting to have an open discussion about changes she's put forth?
Yeah, what I will say is what's refreshing is the mayor came in identifying ways that she can make the process more efficient. And part of that is the governing process, which is one of the many vehicles for us to create policy through the CCRs. And she proposed recommendations on, what she believed would make the process more efficient. And while there is merit to her recommendations, there's the way that council amends ordinances, which is through council action. How we learned about the recommendations was through a memo that we received that this process was changing. And again, going back to, I believe 2023, 2024, Councilman Mark White led the charge for us to essentially revisit that ordinance. And we took action, we deliberated, and we voted to change that ordinance to create a timeline structure so our CCRs move through the process in a timely manner. And the recommendations that she's put in place, which since have changed since Friday because she did send another memo. But the original changes within the memo was council members prior to gathering signatures. There are now prerequisites before gathering signatures, which would include consulting with her chief of staff, receiving the signature from the city attorney that he has conducted a legal analysis, and then also having our city manager sign off onto our CCRs before we meet with our council colleagues to gather signatures.
Yeah. And also doesn't that also include council members have to include like a statement of intent? What good would you do? Like what service would you be providing that the city doesn't already provide, or how would you improve existing services? That kind of statement, which I don't think you had to do before. But
typically we do that in our like the purpose of our CCRs. It's like the opening statement that we tend to put within our CCRs. And there's other not recommended. There's other changes issued in the memo. And what my colleagues and I take issue with is, one, the ways in which the ordinance was changed unilaterally without council deliberation and or action. But also now the electeds of San Antonio are required to work with unelected officials before we move policy forward. Again, right, our role is to be policy makers, and the role of city staff is to facilitate that policy, if of course legal. Now, the reason for the signature of the city attorney is that way, she's arguing is that way we shield ourselves from any legal impact, which is understandable. However, with the current process, at governance, the city attorney does give a legal analysis of a policy, and the governance committee determines whether or not it moves forward. So I understand the argument. However, there's a process in which that conversation is had publicly.
Yeah. I mean, does that make you question? Well, I mean, this is probably overstating it a bit, but does it make you question like her commitment to San Antonio's form of government, which is weak mayor, strong manager, and that those two are very separate things? You know, is the fact that she wants you to basically check with Eric Walsh before a policy that you want to enact gets advanced. Do you feel like she just doesn't understand that separation between council and city administration?
I would like to believe that the recommendations are coming out of a place of efficiency, right? But efficiency in terms of policy making isn't creating a jungle of legal red tape in which our policy ideas could sink in legal quicksand real quick. And ultimately, if there is an issue in terms of something being preempted or not, with the current or the past ordinance that council did take action on, there is the legal analysis presented to governance and council. And ultimately, right, it's about ensuring that the folks elected by the people have an opportunity to govern for the people. And I think, she came in again, right? She hit the ground running, trying to identify ways to make government more efficient. However, there's policies in place and practices in place that we change.
Did she hit the ground running after talking to you about the policymaking process, or did that come later? So after she'd made the recommendation.
So what I will say, right, in our conversations, she did ask, like, what are your thoughts on the CCR process? So like she did consult, I can only speak for myself, but she did check in to understand the process.
Did she say, by the way, I'd like to really very seriously change this process?
In terms of a briefing on the memo we received, we didn't receive the full details. If that's
okay.
How do you see this meeting this week going? And I ask because she has kind of stuck to this position of, I can make these changes. We don't need to have a vote of this 11-member body. And you have a majority of council members saying, we actually want to take a vote. Where is this going to go? It seems like she's been unwilling to budge. Council is unwilling to budge. Is this going to be a kind of a stalemate, or?
If I can this is the Wednesday meeting you're going to have that you insisted on.
The forced meeting.
So no. So go ahead. Good.
just like what is going to happen? Because so far, both sides kind of seem to be at an impasse.
Yeah, I think a number of things, right? I'm expecting at Wednesday's meeting, which is one, the general public deserves to know how their electeds process and the ways in which they govern has changed. And this is a public conversation that I believe needs to take place. Again, some of the changes have merit, but the public also deserves to hear the justification and argument on why these changes were unilaterally made. So that's goal one, right? My constituents deserve to hear from the individual who initiated the change, why they changed them.
So from the mayor.
Correct. And also, right, I think there's opportunity for us to ask Eric, hey, there's consensus here for you to agendize something for action, which could be, right, we take action on the changes that are presented to us. So there's opportunity there as well to talk about where there's consensus and where there's dissent in terms of the proposed changes. Again, right, I think about how, every individual on council and even city staff, our time is limited, but we need to ensure that the structure and governance practices in place withstand council, right? I think a lot of the proposals, it's like, oh yeah, I don't mind checking with the mayor's chief of staff. Oh, I don't mind checking with Andy. But ultimately, like the goal is not about it's not about my relationship with these individuals. It's about with the process. And when we're all gone from council, that there's a process in place where policy can work its way through the process without hitting barriers.
Yeah.
Is part of this too a desire for you all to prevent future mayors from going in and unilaterally saying, I'm mayor, these are the changes I want to see?
I think in terms of the changes that were made with the ordinance, and I have spoken to the city attorney to understand how this was able to be amended or changed without a council vote. And one of the arguments was, as long as the change to the ordinance doesn't contradict the existing ordinance, it can be done. And as long as it doesn't impact city services, which I would argue CCRs are the vehicles in which we impact city services, is impacting city services. And I haven't been satisfied with the answers that I've received, because again, right, I want to also acknowledge, like, this wasn't the mayor identifying ways that she can just change policy on her own, right? She did what she should do, and she consulted with the city attorney, and the city attorney told her, or shared with her rather, what I just laid out, right? Because this is the response he gave me when I asked, how can this be done? But if we look at the city charter, section 11 and 12, it's city council that determines the procedures and process of the policymaking process. So I'm seeing a couple of contradictions, and I think the goal of Wednesday's meeting is to also hear, the justification on why this ordinance is allowed to be changed unilaterally through a memo without council action.
What would be your ideal outcome Wednesday? What do you want to have happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think going back to what I just laid out, right? What I'd like is for the general public to have an understanding of how the CCR process or practice, rather, procedure has changed. What's the justification of those changes? And then also, how can we take action in terms of removing the requirement that requires city council to check in or receive the signature of the city attorney before gathering signatures from our colleagues? Again, right, the goal is, or my understanding from the memo is that his signature is required to address that he has conducted a legal analysis before it moves forward. That's something that we already do, but in the public arena. And the public deserves to know why their council member can't provide or move forward with a solution to meet their needs.
Could you envision running a policy proposal through Eric Walsh? Would you do that?
So, right, I think about different examples of policies that we have filed, right? Like, for example, with increasing the fines and fees for auto and metal recyclers, which, was a huge issue for District 5 residents and some folks on the border as well. And during the research process, right, our teams do a lot of due diligence before we get to the CCR process, and we continue to do it beyond that. And with that CCR, for example, we were told that a lot of it was preempted. It's the state, TCEQ's jurisdiction, but through our advocacy and with community, we were able to get to the point where we moved a CCR forward. We increased the fines and fees for auto and metal recyclers and created a more streamlined process for a fire response plan. And I point to that example because we had originally been told it was preempted, that it was a state issue. And what if I had to get a signature, and it dies, right? My constituents don't get a solution.
Right.
And that's the concerning part is that, policies die that our constituents need solutions for.
Yeah. Now, the ordinance we referred to a few times now, it seems like the big motivator for that ordinance, which was passed in 2024, was that a lot of policy proposals just kind of the mayor would allow them just kind of linger for months and sometimes over a year. What's the longest you ever had a CCR just hanging out without any action? And what was it? What were you trying to do?
I would have to look at the queue, but no, Councilman Mark White, as soon as he came onto council, he talked about the issue. He worked with Mayor Ron Nirenberg to take action. But part of the original recommendations that council rejected was the need to get the city attorney's signature. So we've already debated this, and council declined to have that part of the updated ordinance. Again, right, there's a process in which we discuss this. In terms of timeline, I would have to look back, but there were CCRs that would just sit there and
I think a big one we can think about, it wasn't filed by you, but that horse carriage one, the horse carriage ban sat for well over a year, and the purpose of it was, I think they wanted the ban by the end of, 2023, and it didn't even get heard until early 2024.
Yeah. So you've got a lot going on at City Hall. You've got you've got Project Marvel, you've got the Spurs Arena, you've got budget deficit, and you've got this kind of fight over the CCR. And in the midst of all this, you also have a city council member who was arrested about a week and a half ago for on suspicion of driving while intoxicated, which would be the third council member in 3 years to be picked up on the same charge. But so far, there's been no discussion, no public discussion about any kind of censure votes, any kind of vote of no confidence, as we saw with District 10 council member Clayton Perry nearly 3 years ago, and then with his successor in the district, Mark White, about a year ago. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a different number of moving pieces, right? One, right, everyone has the right to due process, and we need to ensure that the legal process plays itself out. And I believe you all wrote an article or interviewed the mayor, and I agree, in which, right, these are different circumstances in which, the video's public, right? And she said she did not drink. Yeah. Whereas past videos, folks said I did, right? Or there's videos where, they're clearly inebriated. So I think, right, there's still unknowns. And then once we know when the process plays out, I believe that's when council should have a conversation about what. Well,
I mean, councilwoman, and I didn't actually identify the councilwoman. It's District 8's Evelise Mesa Gonzalez. It's true. She in the police body cam video, she's telling the arresting officer, no, I've had nothing to drink. I think she said that
multiple
twice.
times.
Yeah. But she's also issued 2 public statements in which she's fallen well short of saying that she had consumed alcohol that night. But she did say, this is not my finest hour. I made a mistake. She was apologetic. She made a mistake, which I think very clearly implies that she had been drinking. But you think even at that, you need to wait?
I think, right, everyone has a right to due process, and we need to ensure that process is followed. And once folks have information in terms of what levels were like, I think that's when council can have a conversation. I think to your point, I haven't been paying attention to the interviews, right? I'm focused on the budget deficit, Project Marvel, my constituents' needs.
You got a lot of stuff.
So that's what I'll say in terms of that issue.
Yeah. Why do you think San Antonio has this, is the city where it's, 3 council members within 3 years arrested on suspicion of driving while intoxicated? I cannot think of another Texas city or U.S. city where a city council has that same, claim to fame. What is it about this city council that you think lends itself to this fact that we've just been seeing this in recent years repeatedly play itself out?
I think it begs the bigger question. What is it about the city in which we do have a drinking and driving concern, right? And this goes back to debates that we have about kiosks downtown that are advertising alcohol on a city kiosk. When we talk about digital advertisements coming downtown, how can we exclude advertising vaping and alcohol? And I think it's a larger conversation that we need to have because I don't think it's just these council members, right? Unfortunately, it's a larger percentage that we're seeing folks throughout the city that are getting behind the wheel and not Ubering or using public transportation. And I think in terms of where council can take initiatives, I think it's in terms of how do we invest in better public transportation? And so instead of drinking and driving, folks hop on a via bus. How do we minimize the amount of advertisements for alcohol? And I've raised this during a council meeting before. Every time I head to City Hall down Commerce, by UTSA, there's always a Dos Equis ad. And if it's not at the corner of La Trinidad, it's at the corner of Houston Street. So it's like, it's just advertisements of alcohol everywhere. And I think we just need to talk about just drinking and driving as a whole in the city.
Is there also a culture of these city events? Or I know one kind of perk of being on council is you go to a lot of events, galas. Is there a culture of heavy drinking there? I mean, I guess I'm curious what about it of that yes, the city, there is a problem, but why do we see that amongst these elected officials? And we don't see it, for example, on like Bexar County Commissioner's Court. We haven't seen it on school boards. We haven't really seen it on other elected bodies, even in the city or county. So I'm curious, is there something about just the prevalence of alcohol at city functions or functions where council members find themselves?
I think that's a question for those individuals. Honestly, I can't tell.
So you don't go to those kind of parties?
No. I always laugh when Councilman Pelaez would always talk about like the galas and this. I'm like, what parties are you at? Like,
oh yeah, his royalty speech.
Yes. I'm like, or like the
city council is the closest.
You're not in the box.
Or like the Spurs suite seats. I'm like, who's going to these Spurs games and why am I not getting invited?
Right. So there's like we said, as has been made clear throughout this podcast so far, there is a lot going on, including this budget deficit. City Council is going to get a draft budget this week at Thursday. And you're going to have to close a budget deficit of about more than $30 million. Personally, like, where would you go for savings?
So I think there's there's a lot of moving pieces here, right? And I think what we've seen in terms of, for example, ND5 and what we saw in the budget survey and the open-ended questions was there's a lot of concerns in terms of vacant lots and properties, right, that serve as nuisance properties and a host of all other issues from public safety, health safety, and so much more. And I think there's opportunity in terms of fines, increasing the vacant lot fines, absentee landlord fines, to ensure that there's more accountability in terms of addressing that nuisance, but also there's already a fine and a violation issued to those pieces. How can we potentially explore increasing those fines and fees for accountability? And then also, I think it's just, again, going back to Project Marvel, there's a lot of omitted cost and a cost associated with that project that may impact the general fund. How can we get the numbers from Project Marvel to understand how much is going to impact the general fund? So I think there's a lot of information I need before I could talk about where should we be making cuts in terms of the upcoming budget.
Is there any chance that City Council will consider increasing the property tax rate?
So during the last budget briefing, there was not far from consensus in terms of increasing the property tax rate. And I have been following the city of Austin where there's an appetite to increase the property tax rate. But with the San Antonio Council, we are hearing a strong, hard no in terms of increasing the property tax rate to support the deficit.
Do you have a sense of when this draft is laid out where the city manager is going to be looking to make cuts?
I believe with the upcoming budget briefing, we'll receive those. We are getting our one-on-ones with the city manager. I've received mine to see where there will be potential increase in fines and fees, as well as like what positions may be frozen and all those different moving pieces. So we're still getting into the weeds of that. And I think sometime this week, we'll be getting an update on the budget.
Okay. Now, and we'll make this your last question. I know you've got a lot to do. It's a busy week for you, so we won't keep you tied up. But you're at the very beginning or near the very beginning of your final term in office, because this is City Council's first time. The mayor and city council is going 4 years at a stretch. So at the end of this, you will be leaving office. The fact that you don't have to worry about fundraising, not that you worried that much about it. Honestly, you weren't a great fundraiser. So you didn't worry much about it before. But how does
people support?
How is it? Do you feel liberated in a way that you don't have to, you don't have to worry, if not about fundraising, about the next election and, mounting another campaign for office?
When you work towards meeting the needs of your constituency and have grassroots organizing that we do within our office, right? Like, for example, we have Office of the People where we do door-to-door outreach. And as long as we know we continue to meet the needs of our constituents, right? That's where the work is in terms of how we identify our policy priorities and we're going to continue that work. To your point, right? We have Project Marvel, budget deficit, and just other things going on. I'm ready for committee assignments. Like, I need more work. Give me more work.
Well, we didn't even touch on that.
It's kind of insider baseball. But so by now, each city council member has 3 committee assignments.
Yes.
This is kind of this is another way the city council gets involved in the shaping of city policy.
The CCRs move through these committees.
Yeah, and it's transportation, economic development, public community health and safety, public safety, kind of all the big areas. And normally you would have expected to have your committee assignments. Why don't you under Mayor Jones?
I'm not too sure what's going on there, but I'm eager to get my assignments and just
because it seems like you're starting budget deliberations this week. The
summer break is over.
The summer break is over, and yet you really can't get, there's a big part of what you do at City Hall that you can't do because you don't have committee assignments. So, and I know that wasn't a question, but if you want to respond to it, that's fine. If not, we can go ahead.
No, I'm eager to get my assignments. I'm ready to be assigned more work. And to your point, right? That's how we move policy and move things through the process to make sure that we're impacting our communities. And I'm ready to get to that work.
Now, before we let you go, just one last thing. You mentioned, going door to door. And I know that, in your first 2 terms, I'm not sure what on how frequently you went door knocking, but you're well known for you and your staff kind of hitting the streets and just knocking on doors, just checking in with your constituents. When's the last time you did that? And what were their big concerns?
Yeah, so we were block walking to invite folks to a Normoil public meeting. And every time, for example, we have a bond project moving through the process like Smith Park, my team and I will go door knock to flyer, invite them to the community meeting. So I'd say maybe 2 weeks ago, we were at the doors inviting folks to an update for a park. And it's something that we continue to do, right? And to your point, I've been outspent every time. But we know we're doing good work and engaging community that, send as much mail as you want. I just have a lot of confidence in the work my team and I have done in terms of outreach, community engagement, and that work's going to continue because we have 4 years of policymaking and it's my constituents who drive those policy priorities. And I can't do it without checking in on them to see what their needs and priorities are.
Were there any common complaints? Did you get a lot of, what is this Project Marvel thing that I keep hearing about so much?
During the election season, when I was hitting for the campaign side, there was a lot of concern with Project Marvel. And again, right, going back to many of my residents don't have basic infrastructure like streets and sidewalks. And that's why I'm very proud of, leading the fight to increase funding for NAMP and IMP and receiving one of the highest infrastructure bonds in 2022. because that's what my constituents need. And despite all that drastic investment, much needed investment, there's still so much more need. And what we're hearing at the doors, especially during the campaign season, was like, I need a curb. I need a sidewalk. And you're talking about a new $1 billion facility. So that's where, again, right, when I go to the dais and I debate, that's because of what I'm hearing from my constituents helping form the argument.
Okay. Well, Councilwoman Castillo, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming. And thank you for watching and listening. If you have not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, please do so. Just drop to the show notes, click on it. Just do whatever you have to do to sign up. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week.